So we'll begin by ringing the bell 3 times. And we'll just start with an opportunity to just bring awareness into this room, let go of the hustle and bustle of getting here, and just having a few moments to do absolutely nothing. Just take a moment to work out any kinks. Find a comfortable place. You want to have your back be fairly straight. Have your head resting comfortably on your shoulders. As we said, sometimes it helps to imagine a string from the base of your spine all the way up through the crown of your head. Just gently holding you in that upright position. If there's any stress or tension that you're feeling in your shoulders, just take a moment to imagine it just simply melts away, allowing your shoulders to feel relaxed and comfortable. And if you like, you can breathe in, counting to 4, and breathe out, counting to 6. Bringing awareness into your body. And take a few moments to be very specifically aware of the sensation of your feet against the floor. And now just simply allow the breath to find its natural rhythm. This evening we'll do a slightly different meditation practice, and this is one of concentration. Where we can gently focus on all the minute sensations of breathing in and breathing out. And as we continue to focus on the sensation of breathing in and breathing out, you can also be aware that thoughts and feelings will continue to arise. You'll hear sounds and feel other sensations. You can just simply imagine whatever it is that arises, that it's just like a cloud floating by in the sky. Not trying to hang on to anything, but also not trying to push anything away. Just gently aware as we continue to focus attention on the sensation of breathing in and breathing out. Again, there will be moments when you realize you've been distracted, lost in a thought or a story. And again, we can celebrate that moment because that is a moment of being present. And then we can just return our attention again and again, as many times as needed. Paying attention, being aware of the sensation of breathing in and breathing out. Well, welcome. You survived until week 3. I always see that as a positive result. And this evening we started with a concentration practice. And so the last 2 weeks we were actually doing what's called a natural awareness, where we're just sitting and being. And there's a couple of similarities between the two practices, but you'll start to notice that they feel a little bit different. So tonight what we were doing, and it's oftentimes the basic practice of meditation that people start with, is just that concentration on the breath. And so sometimes that can give you a little bit of an anchor. We always think of it as, it's like the little puppy on the leash that we're just gently pulling them back again and again to being aware of that sensation of breathing in and breathing out. And then in natural awareness, we're just sort of hanging out in an attentive and aware state. And so oftentimes people will say, well, is one better than the other? Because I only want to do the best one. And actually they're a nice complement to each other. So you might find, depending upon what time of day or day of the week or what the situation is, that there might be that sense of kind of vagueness. And so you'll find value in kind of focusing very specifically on the breath. Sometimes you'll even put your hand on your chest to bring your focus back into your body. It's always our intention to be able to just simply sit and be aware of whatever it is that arises moment by moment. So you can kind of like try those two things out and see how they work together. And then next week we're going to spend a lot more time talking about positive imagery, which is another way that we meditate. Has anybody ever done guided meditations? So, when my brain is completely out of control, I can put in my little headphones and go off into whatever land they want to take me. And there's a very powerful practice that's a good way to train our minds to use the power of our imagination. And so that was actually something that was taught by the Buddha 2,500 years ago. So once again, we want to have a lot of tools in our toolbox so that when we're meditating, we can find these different ways to sort of get in the groove depending upon what we might be experiencing at any given time. And tonight, we're going to talk about what it means to be Buddhist. And so, first of all, the disclaimer is, first of all, you don't have to come out of the Buddhist closet and say that you're a Buddhist in order to benefit from these practices. You don't have to be anything but just awake. And so we have this discussion only so that we can explore kind of what it is that you want to do with these teachings. If you just come and hang out with me, that's awesome. Or you may decide that you want to take them into your everyday life and really make a deeper commitment to them. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that's about. And so in Buddhism, you'll often see they'll talk about the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then when we talk about that, we also include the 5 precepts, the guidelines for skillful living that are included in almost all the Buddhist paths. So we'll talk about the 3 jewels in a moment. And I have had an opportunity over the last 15 years or so to sort of try out, and this may be something that you want to explore, of what it is to identify yourself as a Buddhist. And one of the first things I found out, that as I sort of tried it out and wanted to say that, oh yeah, I'm Buddhist. If anybody knows that you are self-identifying as Buddhist, they are going to be on the lookout for any time that you do or say anything that they have judged not Buddhist enough. So be aware that you are walking into a landmine. Early on, when I'd taken my refuge vows, and I was so passionate about Buddhism, and 15 years ago, still there weren't that many Buddhists, and I went to a conference, and it wasn't the kind of thing where I would normally expect to talk about, what I thought was my spiritual path. And there was this beautiful actress there, and when you go to work conferences and you have to sort of break into small groups, and this woman was there, and she was in my small group, and as you just say something about yourself, she labeled herself, she says, "Oh, I'm a Buddhist." And I was so excited. I couldn't wait to talk to her at the break. I wanted to compare notes, I wanted to know who was her teacher, I wanted to know where she'd been, what she'd done. And so I was clamoring out after her on her way to the bathroom, and I stopped her, and I said, "I'm Buddhist too." And I thought there would be like this deep connection, and we would know that we were sisters, and she was going to be my best friend for the rest of my life. And she kind of looked at me strange, and I guess I was beneath her. But I really wanted to engage her in conversation, and I said, "So, do you have a favorite Buddhist book?" I thought that was the easiest question I could possibly imagine answering. And with a swoosh of her hand, she simply said, "Well, I've never read any Buddhist books. I just sort of feel Buddhist." Really? "Do you have a Buddhist teacher then?" "Well, no, but I just sort of like the idea of being Buddhist." Really? Turned out she was not going to be my best friend for the rest of my life. So I learned that when we label ourselves and we think we're labeling others correctly, that we may not be so accurate in understanding who we are and who they are. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So if you're going to walk into this dangerous land of thinking about maybe calling yourself a Buddhist, what you might be getting yourself into. And so in most of the Buddhist traditions, when anyone comes to the path, many people are born into a Buddhist family, and so they might just simply go to temple and make merits, or put flowers on the altar. So there's a lot of different things that being Buddhist can mean. But usually if you're consciously choosing to walk the Buddhist path, the very first thing is that you would take the refuge vows. And the refuge vows are taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So for those of you who have been here on Sunday morning, we often start with the refuge prayer. And we remind ourselves, so we're taking refuge in the Buddha. Taking refuge in the Buddha is, once again, we see statues. We're not worshiping them, but we're simply seeing this person who lived 2,500 years ago as a role model, inspiring us and reminding us that within each of us is this innate Buddha nature, the innate wisdom and compassion, that even though we may not always act skillfully, that potential exists within all beings. And so it can be quite motivating to think that here is this person who never claimed to be anything, not even a teacher. In fact, the last words of the Buddha, you can imagine that he was 80 years old. You would think, 2,500 years ago, that's a pretty good life. And all his students were, not prepared for him to die. And they're asking him to hang on and give one more teaching. And he didn't name a successor. He didn't tell them what they were supposed to do. He said, you don't need a teacher. Just simply be a lamp unto yourself. And so the Buddha had a lot of faith in humans in order to be able to tap into that innate potential that you have within you. And so we can be inspired by that, look for the good in ourselves, and imagine the possibility that you have everything you need to live this wise and compassionate life. So when we take the refuge vows, we are vowing that that will be our reliance, that we will rely upon that innate Buddha nature until we are fully awakened, and then spontaneous, proactive Buddha activity will naturally unfold. I don't know about you guys, but that doesn't happen very often in my life. But sometimes it seems that naturally I do the skillful thing. And the more I practice and the more I hang out with you wonderful people, the better I am at acting skillfully. So these teachings, the Dharma, one of the things we're so fortunate in is that for 2,500 years, people have been practicing this. Almost was to tell you what the Buddha said. Don't believe a word I'm saying. Buddhism is about behavior more than about belief, so you have to try it out for yourself. So we take refuge, we rely upon the fact that many people came before us and tried these teachings out and found them to be so incredibly valuable, transformational in many cases. But it doesn't make a whit of difference if you don't go and try it out. Even if you feel really Buddhist-y, it won't make a difference if you don't actually practice. And so when we're taking refuge in and relying upon the Dharma, that's a reminder to us that we can't just read all the books that might be Buddhist on our bedside table. We actually have to walk the talk. And lastly, taking refuge, relying on the Sangha. And I talked about this a little bit on Sunday because I know that, it would be so much easier, it might seem, to just go and practice by yourself. But practicing it with others is where the juicy part exists. Because we rarely annoy ourselves as much as other people annoy us. And so you can say, thank you. Thank you for annoying me so I can practice. Okay, maybe that's a little bit too far. But the Buddha found out that when people came together and monks and nuns were hanging out and they were having so many difficulties of just simply trying to practice together. When I took my monastic vows, one of the other things that the Buddha was asked before he passed away, they had come up with 256 rules for the monks. And the nuns had to have 354 rules, because we're just a little bit crazier. And so the monks and the nuns said, oh, Buddha, which rules should we keep? And he said, just keep the major ones and don't worry about the minor ones. Well, of course, he passed away, and as often happens, nobody was quite sure what the major ones were and what the minor ones were. So they decided that to be a monk or a nun, you had to keep them all. And so when I took my monastic vows with my Buddhist teacher, he wanted to make sure I knew that one of the vows is do not hide the rice under the vegetables. And do not hide the vegetables under the rice. Now apparently this was a big problem in monastic living, but you know what? I'm pretty comfortable that I can have my rice and my vegetables all out there, and that even if a little bit of rice gets hidden under the vegetables, I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem. But I say this because it's interesting how we can make something way more complicated than it really is. And that's where the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, we rely on our innate Buddha nature, we rely on the truth of the practice, and we rely on each other to support and encourage us. So I'm not going to worry too much if you have some sort of weird issue with rice or vegetables. But we're going to talk about the 5 precepts, and you can see how these might quite simply mean for more skillful living. So you go on and you see that the Buddhist code of ethics are usually listed as these 5. You can go to the 256 later, but the 5 should pretty much suffice. So we want to think about honoring life. Sometimes it's more strictly defined as not killing. But I also emphasize that one of the things I love about the Buddhist path is that one of the things we do, Pete and I do prison dharma together, and I loved the way some of the inmates talked about, if you want to be a Buddhist, try being a Buddhist in prison. Now, there's a challenge for you. And so there's 1,500 inmates over on the Muslim side, and 6 of them are Buddhist. And these are some real badasses. Because if you're going to be Buddhist in prison, you better be a badass, because you're going to have to defend yourself. And so these guys were joking. I was like, what is it? So why do you take that chance? Why are you willing to be a Buddhist in this situation? And they all said the same things, because I don't have to check my mind at the door. Now, one might see that as a super awesome thing, that you don't have to believe something that you don't believe, that doesn't make sense to you, that somebody told you that in order to be saved or whatever, you got to believe this one thing. But not checking your mind at the door is also a challenge, that there's no easy answers. That we have to recognize that every moment is as unique as a snowflake. And so we have to look at what is actually happening to know what is the most skillful thing to do. So when we go through these precepts, we talk about them as guidelines. It would be nice if they were always one way or always the other. But I don't know about you, but in my life, I've often found nothing applies to all situations. So with honoring life, that's a good thing, yeah? I'm grateful. Nobody packing heat in here today? Thank you. That's awesome. And so we can honor the lives of ourselves and the lives of others. I grew up in Texas, so I shot a shotgun and a rifle. I had one ex-husband who wanted me to shoot an AK-47. But it's not the gun, it's the intention. But it does seem to make it a little bit easier to kill someone when you have an AK-47. I don't know, I'm just saying. So we can honor life, and we can figure out how that might apply in your everyday life as you go about dealing with others in a kind and considerate way. Not stealing is more than just not going to the store and not paying for something. It's about not taking what is not freely given. And in this one, I think, in all ways, it's about what do you do when nobody's looking? If you could take those 2 cookies and nobody would know it was you, and you're only supposed to take one, what would you do? I have to tell the great donut story. Okay. So one of the things I learn a great deal from the work that we do with inmates is that you can imagine that they themselves find that these precepts are not easy to hold. And one of the gentlemen was working with us, and he was talking about they had had some sort of medical fair, and there was donuts set out for all the men to come by, get a donut, and find out about high blood pressure or diabetes or whatever that might be. And one of the guys that has completely changed his life, turned his life around, is such a supporter and encourager of everyone there in the prison. He was standing there, and he's worked in the medical clinic for over 10 years, and so he felt a sense of responsibility to the people who he had come to know and who had come to trust him. And he was telling us the story that he was struggling about this situation from a Buddhist perspective. And he said, that he was standing there and a guy walked up and took all the donuts and put them under his coat. And he turned and looked right at this guy. And the guy described it as, we looked at each other and had an entire conversation with our eyes. And he was trying to figure out what to do. Don't take that which is not freely given. But also don't lie. Tell the truth. He was conflicted that he let the guy walk out. And he had spent a week struggling with, did he do the right thing? Now in the big scheme of things, it's just a bunch of donuts. But it starts to get at the point of how we see ourselves in the world around us and whether or not we're really ready to step up and act in a skillful way. So we kind of use the litmus test with them. Well, what would have created the most good and eased the most suffering? And if he had told, it's a possibility that the guy would have taken him down. And he himself, who is about to get out in just a short decade, may have had to go to the hole, may have had his sentence lengthened. And if he didn't tell, he felt horrible that he was losing the trust of the people that he had worked with for over 10 years. So sometimes we think it's just a donut. But it's really talking about the way we are deciding to show up in life. A sense of integrity. A sense of caring about doing the skillful thing. And so he didn't tell. And maybe he saved a life because somebody didn't get killed, which might have happened if he had told. But that's the reason why these are guidelines. This is an opportunity for each of us to decide how we show up in a real way. Now, as an end note to this story, I thought this was such a great example of the 5 precepts as guidelines. And so we go to another side on Kansas side, we do a Max over there, and many of the guys are very young. And I thought I was going to tell them this poignant story about the donuts. And 8 of the 10 guys looked at me at the end of when I told them he took the donuts. Well, don't be stupid. Of course you don't tell on him. They said, that's a no-brainer. So probably I had failed to completely convey the value of the donut story. And so I was trying to make it up. And, no, guys, really, there's a conflict here. No, I don't care. No, not really. I'm not going to do it. Are you going to do it? No, I'm not going to do it. You think I'm stupid? No. So I was really struggling, and I thought I completely lost him until one of the guys was doing his second round, been in about 20 years this time, and he sort of just waved his hand at all those young men, and he said, sometimes you get at an answer going this way, and sometimes you get at the same answer going another way. I thought that's what it was all about. That you may still not tell on the guy taking the donuts, but you might not do it for the right reason. And so that's why these are to be gnawed on, chewed at, reflected upon. Don't take them at face value, because there's some pretty deep stuff going on here when you go into your life and try to figure out what it looks like when you try to apply them. Pretty easy. It's okay to have sex if you're Buddhist. Try not to harm anybody, including yourself. And do not take intoxicants to the point of heedlessness. Has everybody been at a point of heedlessness in their life? Is everybody over the age of 21? Then we've all had a moment of heedlessness. And so it's more likely that you're going to act a little bit more skillfully if you back it up a little bit and not get over the line. There's a heedless line out there. And so, once again, these may seem really easy, and one of the things I wanted to do that we could talk about is that we could talk about an example in your own life when you struggled with what you felt was an ethical issue. Can everybody think of something? To tell on somebody, to not tell on somebody. Conflict at work when somebody's doing something wrong. Maybe a conflict within yourself when you lied to someone and only you knew it was true. Everybody got at least one thing you can think about? Ethical moment. So ponder this for a minute, and I think it would be great for us to talk about that, because it's really better if you have a specific example. Can you remember a time when you felt it difficult? Maybe you did something wrong, and then you had to decide whether or not you told on yourself. Or maybe you had to decide if you told on someone else. Or maybe you hurt someone, and you had to make amends. Anybody have a comment you want to make? Was it easy to talk about moral dilemmas? Was it easy to put it in the context of the 5 precepts? What was the most difficult thing?
Well, we were stuck on what kind of donuts they were.
What kind of donuts were they? I guess whether they were,
Glazed.
There's a if it's an eclair, you might go for it. Glazed or just a little sprinkles. All good. So, yes.
Well, I was just thinking that in the workplace, it's such a difficult thing because of the politics of the workplace. And when you see something wrong or going on that's wrong, and you're the little tell person, or you go to the person you should go to and make it known. Sometimes that backfires really bad. I had that happen to me once. And so I don't know how to clear that up. Could you clear that up for me?
Hey, I'm a Buddhist badass. I'll do your work and I'll take care of them.
Badass, so I want you to clear that up.
So what exactly happened to you as a result of doing what you thought was the right thing to do?
Well, eventually I lost my job.
Do you wish you still had that job?
No, I mean, it was absolutely the best thing because, I'm going to end up moving on. But I mean, I do know other people that have had those kinds of situations happen. And because in the workplace, there is a lot of politics that goes on, and there's a lot of nepotism in some workplaces and things like that. And I just kind of wondered what, you just say, I was telling her, maybe you just do like the second grade guy said, where the answer going to go this way, or you get the answer going that way, Maybe you just look at it that way, and mind your own business.
But it doesn't sound like you could have lived with yourself and
I couldn't have, no. It was just, no, I couldn't. So I guess I did the right thing. For me, it was the right thing.
And I would say there's some wonderful Zen stories that go on and on about. So if you were a single mom with 5 children and that was the only job you were going to be able to get, would you have made the same decision?
No.
And maybe that would have been okay too.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that is the complexities of, you knew your situation and you knew what you did was right. How many people have seen somebody else make a decision in a moral dilemma and you've disagreed with the decision they made? How likely did we know everything that went into them making that decision? Isn't it easier to point out when somebody else is making a bad decision than it is for ourselves? Except for me, I'm telling you. I really find it so easy to judge other people. It is, you know, it just looks like I just really find it easy. And yet that is part of this practice, is realizing when we know what we know for ourselves, but we don't know what it's like to walk in another person's shoes. And that's what makes every moment as unique as a snowflake. Yes?
Pet euthanasia. I have recently had a very significant disagreement with someone who, interestingly enough, within the last year decided to study Buddhism, and so this do not kill thing was a huge deal. And her dog had liver cancer and it metastasized, and his back spinal nerves were shot, and not to be too gross, but a chunk of tumor came out of his nose. Okay,
That's pretty gross.
So I see this dog suffering, and to me, it made sense to end his suffering. But because she had just begun studying Buddhism, she decided that she couldn't do that. And then explained to me about how there'd be karma for 17 lifetimes. Or
Dog years.
whatever. And we couldn't reconcile on that. I thought it was the right thing to do to end the dog's suffering. So anyway, there you go.
That is such a great example of what makes this no easy call. If we're trying to create the most good and ease the most suffering, why stop at animals? What about people? Just to recognize that those are not black and white, that we always let the dog live until the moment that there is no more misery that they can withstand. And I can tell you, my mother passed away a year and a half ago. She was pretty clear. She wanted us to pull the plug. And yet did we? I mean, I didn't physically go over and, yank it out of the wall. And I don't know that I could have. But I knew my mother wanted that to happen. And I'm sure many of you have had those same struggles when you see people suffering. And it's not an easy decision. And that's where sometimes these 5 simple precepts are seen as being black and white. A perfect example of why we have to be fully present in the moment to know what'll do the best thing. So thank you for bringing that up.
But
Yes.
I was just going to say, by infinite suffering, which is what we're about, isn't recognizing that you're helping that soul to a better place that isn't suffering, the sort of right thing also, to recognize when it's time to do that. For the animal too, I mean, we have to be close enough as here. To end that suffering, I think is the most gracious thing you can, and honor that life by not making it suffer.
And is there, and is it always right to pull the plug? Yeah, we don't know until we're right there
In the moment.
in the moment. And so, yeah, that's a great point. Cindy, did you want to say?
What I see more than not killing is honor life. That's what I see, and that's what I think.
Yeah.
And like my father signed papers that he did not want us to resuscitate. And we watched him for the last few months really suffer. I didn't personally because I couldn't, but I knew from afar what was going on. But we did that to honor what he wanted, and that was honoring his life.
And I really appreciate you bringing that up, because my only intention here is to paint this with a complicated brush. Because if we want it to be all one way or all the other, all of you, I'm sure, have had those experiences when you know these are not easy calls to make. It didn't take us very long to get from the donut to honoring life and what that might look like. So thank you for that. Yeah. So let's just take a moment and close your eyes and just take the opportunity to just be aware of whatever you're experiencing. So thank you guys for your willingness to be honest about how difficult that is. And that's what makes life so joyful, is the fact that we know what it feels like to feel that pain. And so it is a little bit more difficult to walk this path, but I've always considered it worthwhile. And so I wanted to take our last 30 minutes and just talk about the refuge vows themselves. So once again, this is just, you might just be here because this is of interest to you. You might be here because it feels like it resonates with you. And wherever you are on that spectrum, that is A-okay. And I did want to feel like I did you good service and did a little bit of the history of what has happened in the Buddhist tradition over the last 2,500 years, and starting to put things into perspective, how it has morphed and changed along the way. So if you look at this sheet right here, it talks about different refuge vows. And I'll go through this fairly quickly just so you'll have a good idea about the different things you might hear. And if you start on the one that says the Pali Refuge, which is on this page, one of the things I love about this is when you go to Bodh Gaya, where Buddha attained his enlightenment, and you're walking around the Bodhi tree in this beautiful Maha Bodhi temple that's hundreds of feet high and just got a whole new gold top on it, and you hear this beautiful music, this chanting, just sort of wafting in and out. And it is this Theravadan refuge vow. And you can hear, in that very deep way that the monks will chant. You'll hear, Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. And so you can just imagine you're just walking around and hearing that just sort of as a background. If you get there at 5 o'clock in the morning or you leave late at night, it's always there around you. And so in Buddhism, most of the traditions have some chanting that is included in the meditation. And I always love, first of all, it took about 5 years to convince Pete that chanting was okay. There are some traditions where there is no chanting. But in most of the traditions, they do have quite a bit of chanting, and some traditions are all chanting. And I love that there's a scientific explanation now that many people have heard of this idea. It's called entrainment. So when people sing together or chant together, your heartbeats actually start to sync up. And so it's always wonderful here on Sunday morning when we have like 175 people chanting together, because there's a lot of hustle and bustle that happens as people are coming in and finding their seat, and we sort of settle down. And then when we all start to chant, it's as if you can just sort of feel everybody sort of getting in sync with each other. And so in the Buddhist traditions, this chanting of the different refuge vows is part of that tradition that can be so incredibly wonderful. You can Google this and find some wonderful YouTubes on it, I'm sure. But you can see in the Pali Refuge that they're very straightforward. They're saying, I'm taking refuge in the enlightened Buddha, I'm taking refuge in the sublime Dharma teachings, and I'm taking refuge in the noble Sangha community. And so historically, right after the Buddha passed away, in about 400 or 500 years, and even up until today, there are many countries like Thailand and Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Laos, that still are predominantly in this Theravadan, or the teaching of the elders tradition. And so they just simply did exactly what the Buddha said, was, he did it, I'm going to take refuge in his example, I'm taking refuge in his teachings, and I'm taking refuge in the Sangha community. Sangha being this Pali and Sanskrit word of spiritual community. And historically what happened then, as it started to carry across Asia, there was sort of this additional thought came to be. And Some of you may be familiar with the Heart Sutra, the Heart of Wisdom Sutra, which is about non-duality. So when you read the Theravada teachings, it's very dualistic. I'm here, I'm not enlightened, I'm trying to get to the other shore where I'm gonna be enlightened, and here's the way I get there. The Heart of Wisdom Sutra started to explore this possibility that there's no here and there's no there. It just is an illusion. And so this was pretty radical thinking back around the time that Jesus was alive, of trying to understand, what if I am you? Anytime you take away subject and object and realize that we are more than just inseparably interconnected and interdependent, that in fact, each of us is just sort of a little ecosystem for billions of bacteria. And it feels like I end right here, and then there's something else happening, and you begin over there. But what we start to understand is that it is just all this flow of living, and that no eyes, no ears, no tongue, no nose, this beautiful symphony of how it's all the same thing. And it's also not. So when you hear the non-dual teachings in Buddhism, it can be that sort of cognitive dissonance, which is exactly what it's trying to create. So form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, is one of the famous lines from the Heart Sutra. And you can imagine, 2,000 years ago, people are like going, what? I see this desk, I don't know what you're talking about. But now we know that from an atomic level, that this desk seems like it's something, but it's really just a whole bunch of atoms, and atoms are mostly just energy whirling around in space in a certain motion. And then don't even get me started, because I can't talk very much about it, but there's a thing about a wave and a particle and quantum physics, and before you know, your head starts to explode. But it seemed like the Buddhists knew something was going on there, more than what meets the eye. And so when you go down into where you see bodhicitta, this idea of awakened heart-mind, and in many of the Buddhist traditions, citta is mind and heart is thought of as one being. And we do know scientifically that there's actually neural networks around the heart. So to think of it as mind versus heart is actually not as accurate as heart-mind. But this idea in the Mahayana, the greater vehicle tradition that happened around this time of the writing of the Heart Sutra, although as an aside, if I wanted you to think I was about to say something that was really brilliant, I would tell you that I'm going to quote Einstein. There are about 500 additional quotes that Einstein never said. Because if somebody wants to sound really brilliant, they tell you that Einstein said it. Now, ironically, that's what started happening with Mr. Buddha here. So even though the Heart Sutra was most likely historically written around the time of Jesus or maybe 100 years afterwards, they sort of retrofitted it and said that the Buddha actually said it, and then it didn't get found for a while. And this tradition happens through all the different kinds of Buddhism. So I'm trying not to be too cynical about it. I think anybody can be enlightened, but I don't have to believe that Buddha said it for it to be worth listening to. So I give you that little bit of disclaimer about be careful if you see things on the internet that they say the Buddha said it. The dude didn't say that much. Otherwise, he would have said a whole lot more than he actually did. So we can take it with a grain of salt, but we can learn from it. And this idea that if we are truly all one living organism, then I cannot go from this shore to that shore and be enlightened. without wanting you all to come with me. And so in the Mahayana tradition, this idea of being a bodhisattva, of not just wanting to be enlightened, and then nirvana actually means extinguishing the flame. Boom. You did so well, you don't have to be reborn. And Buddha never talked about being reborn anyway, as we know. So then in the Mahayana tradition, they wanted this sense of being of service to others to be a bigger component of the teachings. So you can see that they start talking in more lofty terms of, from now until reaching perfect Buddhahood, for the benefit of all sentient beings, without exception, I shall practice the 6 perfections wholeheartedly day and night. So the 6 perfections we're going to talk about next week as well, of generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiastic effort, concentration, and wisdom. And so that these are ways that we can be awakened, but that we can also be of service to each other. And then you get the Bodhisattva vows. So those Zen guys were super hardcore. They loved this non-dual thing. That whole thing of koans and kongans in the Vietnamese tradition, they wanted to say something crazy that sort of made your brain like twist up, and then you were enlightened. Or you had a little moment of enlightenment. If you couldn't think anymore, then you got things on a non-conceptual level. And so that's why they say crazy things like, sentient beings are numberless. We vow to liberate them all. Delusions are inexhaustible. We vow to transcend them. The Dharma teachings are boundless. We vow to realize them. And the Buddha's enlightened way is unsurpassable, and we vow to embody it. So I just want to tell you from a historical perspective, in the Theravada tradition, they thought you could be an arhat, but it was going to be a long time before another Buddha came. The Mahayanas are like, no, the Buddha said we all had within us the innate wisdom and compassion and the ability to be awakened. So it's sort of, you can start to see this sounds like some other religions that you might be aware of, where everybody starts to tell their own story and rewrite what the other people were saying. And then if you turn over on the next page, of course, one of my favorites is what we say on Sunday morning, and from the Tibetan tradition. So historically, you're going along in this, Buddhism came to Tibet. Once again, they said there were some people who weren't actually alive, and they sort of brought it, and they were hiding it, and you found it under a rock, and then it was discovered, but it was really there all along. I don't know, I wasn't there, maybe they're right. But really, it probably came around 600 to 800, and you see that there was this merging of the Bon tradition with Tibetan Buddhism. And so you have the refuge and the bodhicitta being combined. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they went even further, that not only is there no you and no me, but it's all stuff that we can work with. That anything that happens, the shadow and the light, the sun and the darkness, everything can enable us to awaken. So when we say the bodhicitta dedication, when darkness can become the light, that's when we start to realize every moment, even those things that have sucked in our lives, become the things that become blessings. And so it is this not leaving anything out. So that's why the Tibetan Buddhists are all about these wrathful deities, and you'll see Thangka paintings, which are the pictures of these archetypes, and they're like standing on bodies, and they've got knives for fingers. They have no problem with thinking about the dark side of things. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't matter. There's all sorts of stories about this guy was a real fancy dude, and he was the head of Nalanda University, which was a hoity-toity position at the time, and he realized that he just hadn't quite gotten it. And so he went out, and then the story goes that there was a hag and a troll under a bridge, and he slept with the hag, And that's how we became enlightened. Now, I don't know, I wasn't there. I don't know if that actually happened. But the stories are told to evoke the sense in us that even that which we think is good and bad is just simply made up in our mind. And so we can look at things more clearly and not put them in categories of want and not want, but see it's all this rich fodder to have this juicy life, that can be the way we can awaken. And then a little cherry on the top, bing. In the Dzogchen tradition, of course, everybody's always trying to outdo themselves, so there wasn't just 3 vehicles, there were 9 vehicles, and the top vehicle is, well, then it's just all it. And we're already enlightened. And we don't just know it. What if that were true? What if it wasn't a matter that we were trying to do anything? We were just trying to realize that which is already the truth of who and what we are. That's some radical thinking, man. But see, can you feel kind of that little shift? As you look at this historically, you go from, I'm going to have to live a few hundred lives, and I'm going to have to fix and to get ready, and I'm going to have to do a lot of good stuff, and then maybe if I'm really, really, really good, maybe I'll get enough merit and be able to be an arhat. Kind of close, sort of close to Buddha, but not quite. Getting down to the very last Dzogchen of, I and all beings are primordially Buddha. Knowing this to be essentially true, I give rise to the awakened mind of supreme enlightenment. There is truly nothing left to do. And I bet you thought you came here tonight to do something. What if you were already enlightened? Yay! How awesome is that? Okay, so the Dzogchen teachers say, yeah, you're perfect, but we can all be a little bit more perfect. So that's a topic for another day. But I wanted you to be able to have this because starting next week, what we'll do is I'll bring the sheets in so that we can start with the refuge vow. We'll do the Tibetan version because I'm just totally biased. And then we'll end with the bodhicitta dedication next week, which some of you know it, so we might say that tonight. But so I wanted to end there because I thought that from a historical perspective, the last thing I wanted to say is that the Dzogchen, the Zen, the Theravada, the Mahayana, all these different things have come up until contemporary, the 21st century where we are today. And each of you here, you're part of figuring out what does Buddhism look like in America. We really are getting to make it up. When Buddhism has gone to any culture, in any country, it has morphed and been flexible and dynamic enough to be able to show up as it is needed in the time when it is there. So what does Buddhism look like in America? It looks like you. Yay! So any questions before we end? We have about 10 minutes. Yes.
Yeah, what do we call you? Are you a lama?
I am not a lama, and technically, to be a lama, you need to go on a 3-year, 3-month, 3-day, fully cloistered retreat. And so a lama is in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And so that's like the big kahuna. And I would totally do that if my daughter would let me, but she so won't let me. So I am actually a venerable. And so Venerable Oregon Nima, I talked about Nima the other day, was my Buddhist name. And Oregon talks about my lineage. So in a lot of Buddhist traditions, they want to have this whole thing of once again, you gotta trace your roots back to the Buddha. So every lineage has different names that they use, and so in my lineage, the name is Urgen, which is that Dzogchen was said to have come from a place in western Tibet called Odiyana. And so people from there gave this name. Because sometimes you'll write, Tibetan words are never written the same way twice. Sometimes it's written O-R-G-Y-E-N, sometimes written U-R-G-Y-E-N. So I'm a venerable. I'm Vinnie Nina. Thank you, but I'm gonna still use priestess if that's okay. Priestess Nima. Yes.
How did you find your teacher?
What's that?
How did you find your teacher?
That is an excellent question. And a lot of times people ask, do you need a teacher, and when do I need a teacher, and what do I do with this teacher? So my path was that, once again, when I was in college, I went to India and I studied with Mahendra, who was a Vipassana teacher at that time, sort of in the Theravadan tradition. Didn't really speak to me, but I learned about that. And then fast forward a few decades when my life falls apart and I come back to Buddhism and I start going on retreats. And I just started trying out different, go here, go there, try this, read that. Somebody says this person's good, go try that over there. So there was probably about 8 or 9 years where I just sort of floated around and tried from all this historical, everything from Theravadan to Tibetan, everything in between. And some of you know the story that in 1998, Lama Surya Das was on book tour, and there was an organization called the Cornerstone Foundation that brought speakers here to Unity Temple, and they brought Lama Surya Das. And so I got to introduce all the speakers that came, so I didn't know who Lama Surya Das was. Turns out he's this 6'3" jock from Long Island who just happened to spend about 30 years in India, and he spent 9 years on these cloistered retreats. He actually did 2 3-year retreats back to back, and he had started his third, and he had to stop because Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche passed away, and he went back to Sikkim to take care of the funeral. So here's this dude named Lama Surya Das. He's written some book called Awakening the Buddha Within. I'd never read it. I truly didn't know who he was, but I met him in October, and I decided to go to a retreat with him in January, and that was it. It just was so obvious to me that he was my teacher. And so he's been my teacher since then. He is both brilliant and annoying, all in this one person. I kind of sometimes wish that I'd gotten a more grandfatherly-like teacher that, would come over and you'd have warm cookies and they would say wonderful things to you. But Lama Surya Das isn't that kind of a teacher. He's a in-your-face, annoying, saying brilliant things, being crazy, and I love him. He's my teacher. So each of you may decide that you're going to find somebody, or you might just hang out with other Buddhists, and that's a good thing too. And you will get a chance, so once again, don't have to if you don't want to. In a couple of weeks after we get finished with everything, at the end of one of these, we will have a chance to take your refuge vows if you would like to do so. So we'll have a little ceremony for anybody who would like that. And there'll be more information I'll give you about that later on. Any last questions? We've got 3 minutes, a 3-minute question. Yes?
This is quick. How many people in this country self-identify as being Buddhists?
I think 5 million. Does that sound right?
Something like that. 3 to 5.
We are the fastest growing religion in the United States.
Is that one?
If you're small, it's easy to grow fast. 5 million and one if you decide to be a Buddhist. Yes.
When you just mentioned Buddhism as a religion, you used the air quotes.
I did use air quotes,
I've
didn't I?
always kind of thought of Buddhism as something a little
Yes, and this is a huge debate among Buddhists, and so many people would say it is just a way of life. You don't have to convert, you don't have to take your refuge vows, you certainly don't have to dress like this to benefit from these teachings and practices. But some people do practice Buddhism more from a religious perspective, where they have a certain set of beliefs, and they go to the temple and they make offerings, and so it sort of operates more from what I would consider a religious perspective. But you don't have to, like I said, you don't have to believe anything anybody tells you about it. It's really of no value unless you try it out for yourself. So I did use air quotes, I'm so sorry, but yeah, it's, sorry. But thank you, that's a good question, because that does come up.